Well, thank you so much for uh, participating in our program series. For those that don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Cotton. I am the executive director of TechLink, and I'm excited to be joined today by Sarita Jackson, who is the founder of Global Research for International Trade. Is that right? Global Research in International Trade. And so today she's going to kick off the series. We're excited to talk more about our upcoming series this year, focusing specifically on export training. And this is a first program for Black Tech Link, firstly offered for Black Tech Link. We've done small business trainings of all sorts, but I'm really glad to be able to step into this space to really support small businesses that are interested in exporting. And we'll get into a little bit more about that in a moment. But I want to hear back from you, everyone. Please, tell us where you're from. Please write in the chat. We want to know if you have ever exported before, your business. The goal of these workshops are really to provide resources. And so my goal is like everyone that joins these calls, I really want to be able to connect with you individually and really help grow your export endeavors. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the workshop presentation. Give me a moment. Let's see. All right. Does anyone want to share where they're calling from, their company, their name? Please do so in the chat. We want to hear from you. Let's see.
And any lingering questions, any kind of, also, if anyone has some experience, feel free to share, because I'm the type, I'm very interactive and will ad lib as well. So this does not, so it's not just a lecture.
Absolutely. Okay. Let me see.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. So once you hit slide share, we'll be ready to go.
Awesome. Before we begin though, I definitely wanted to just, chat a little bit more about Black Tech Link. I know this may be first time joining any type of Black Tech Link program. And so welcome if this is your first time. Like I said, my name is Elizabeth Cotton. I'm the executive director of Black Tech Link. And, we were founded in 2020 with the mission of focusing on Black communities by supporting them through workforce business development. We do that through training, working opportunities, and, you know, uh, just with the goal of like growing economic opportunities for communities of color. And we launch platforms such as these, and we're excited to partner with different organizations to facilitate trainings. And so please, join our mailing list. I can share that information in the chat. Follow us closely on social media, as like this upcoming year, we have a lot of small business programs coming up. This program specifically is a six-part training series called Breaking Through Global Boundaries. It's an export initiative that is supported by the state of California's governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, GO-Biz. And the goal of this program is to support new to export companies in growing their knowledge and expertise in exporting, and also companies that may have already have a little bit of experience in exporting. We're also here to provide additional resources as well. This is the first workshop in the series, navigating the global market, exporting essentials for small businesses. And we're excited to have Sarita Jackson here today. to kick us off in our series. And if anyone like misses this workshop, you know someone that may want to, get this information, we will record this workshop and provide it for people that may miss it. And then Sarita will also join us early next year for an in-person workshop where she's going to be helping people with their export business planning. And I'm really excited for that. But without further ado, I want to give the floor to Sarita. Stop my share. Let's see.
Great. Okay, so while we get the presentation going, thank you so much, Elizabeth. First of all, I have to just thank you for allowing me to be a part of this initiative. I've done a lot of export training, but particularly with your organization, I'm really excited to continue to spread this knowledge, and to those who are on today, as well as anyone else that gets the recording. So really, thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to participate as well today, and then also upcoming in 2025. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a presentation prepared because I do want to make sure that I just give a broad overview of all of the steps, really for companies. The reason why this title, Navigating the Global Market, Exporting Essentials for Small Businesses, this is really just to give you an overview of what you need to expect. A lot of times when I work with companies, small businesses, the first thing that is very important is understanding, are you export ready? And the way to determine that is, of course, doing an assessment, which I'll talk about, but then also understanding everything that's involved when it comes to international trade. So that's the focus for today. So we can go to the next slide on, what is it that you can expect from today? But again, think of this as a conversation. So if you have any questions, put it in the chat. Put also your information, where you're coming from, and if any of you on the call have had any experience or any questions by the end of this session, we'll definitely have a discussion about that. But we're going to go over all of the different things just so that you have a big picture before getting started. And the reason why I say this is, with my company, I see this a lot. A small business will say, hey, I'll just start exporting because someone was interested in my product overseas, and I'll throw in service too. So, I'm going to just throw in service as well, sprinkle that in. But let's say through e-commerce, somebody was interested in a product, or somebody reached out to me regarding a service, and therefore I'm going to export without really understanding how to put together a systematic approach to doing so. Yes, that may be one client or customer by luck, but if you're really going to do this over the long term and sustainable, it's very important to understand the overall process. And by understanding the overall process, you also understand the costs that you need to be aware of, the resources, not just the financial cost, but human resources, the knowledge, the skills that are required in order to export, so that you don't start the process. I've seen this, start the process, start exporting to a particular market, and then there's a whole host of problems that could have been avoided from the get-go, and then you end up not fulfilling or continuing with the export process. So that's the focus for today. So we'll start with reasons why companies go global. So for the next slide, there are a number of benefits with exporting. Now, I understand I am a small business owner myself. I run the Global Research Institute of International Trade. My company goes back 11 years. I started this in 2013. Prior to that, I was a professor I was on the East Coast and traveling around the world, a professor and a consultant. And I did a lot of work when it came to international trade, but more so overseas, looking at trade agreements and trade policies and things of that nature. Then I brought that to what you're going to see today, starting my own company when it comes to international trade. But when I talk to companies, mainly here in the United States, because a lot of times when I'm overseas, companies are trying to export to the United States. It's such a large market, makes sense. But when I talk to companies here in the United States, there's sort of an interest, But then it comes down to, well, I'm focused on the day-to-day operations of my business. I'm trying to grow here domestically, which I do advise to start off seeing what kind of track record you can have in the domestic market. But they're kind of focused on that without realizing that there's so many consumers that are outside of the United States, clients, customers that you can reach. And by exporting, we're not just promoting this as an activity to do just because, hey, people are talking about exporting. Rather, what I've seen with companies is when they export, it gives them some stability. Yes, you grow your company because now you're increasing sales to other markets, but also when there are times of uncertainty, you have that stability. And what I mean by that, and I can go back and I'm going to get to these points here, but when we look at the Great Recession in 2008, 2007 to 2009, but where it really peaked in 2008, some of the companies that had reached customers in overseas markets still had those other markets to rely on for revenue, regardless of what was going on here in the United States. So that's just something to keep in mind as to, why do I want to go global? Is this just going to be an extra activity for my company, or that requires extra resources? Yes, but the end goal or the end results will truly be beneficial. Again, if you start the process systematically, that you can grow your company, but you can also do so and have the sustainability. So just some of the points: the increased economies of scale, what I was talking about, that you can scale because now you're reaching other consumers, high profit opportunities in the international market. So that's an opportunity to sell a product or a service that's needed in another market, and to actually increase your profits that way. A huge market share, but this is where research really comes in to see, will you really be able to have that huge market share in another country? The life of the product, that's something else to take into account. For example, and I actually did have a client, now that I just thought of this. This was one of the issues with his product. It was an engineer and had developed a product that did not do very well here in the United States. Now, normally I would say, well, if it's not doing well in the United States, you might want to really consider, I'm not saying don't do it, but really think about going international. But that was the best thing that he could have done, even though that product worked well up to a certain point, and then I guess the use of that product diminished here in the United States. But he was able to identify other markets. I'd worked with him, done some market research through a program similar to this, and where he was able to find other markets where there still was a need for that product. So that's another good thing. And then the untapped international market. So just really identifying these opportunities where there may not be much competition. And what I mean by that is, when I started my company 13 years ago, just getting to know many of the small businesses. And I remember when I would ask them, hey, okay, so you've come to me, you're interested in exporting. What are some markets considering? Well, they would name two of the largest markets. One large market at that time that was doing very well economically in the Latin American region was Brazil. And then for Asia was China. Makes sense. Those are two markets at that time that you would hear about. But then when I said, well, what about some other markets where we may have some easier access? You might not have the regulations, and I will talk about this in detail. Why not go to some of those markets where there's not as much competition or fewer regulations? It's not a saturated market. And I would just see, oh, never thought about that. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about untapped international markets. Okay, so we'll go into the first step on the next slide here. And if anyone has any questions after each slide, feel free to either write it in the chat or unmute yourself, ask your question. All right, so the first thing that's very, very important that a lot of companies overlook, number one, the firm assessment. What do I mean by that? Again, let me go back to my example, because with e-commerce, this comes up a lot. I have an order overseas. Now I'm going to really push to send more orders to that particular market without really assessing, do I really have the capacity? When I say my business, Do I really have the resources to expand globally? When I say resources, of course, capital becomes a huge issue. Having the financial resources to export globally. Do I have the human resources? Often gets overlooked. Okay. What I mean by that, having the right people on your team that understand international trade, understand what is required, whether they're in-house or you have to outsource that knowledge, getting the people with the skills, the knowledge to understand the whole export process. Then when you select a market, a particular country, let's say, I'm just going to say Mexico or Canada, because they're right here. And I do more work when it comes to Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. So my go-to is always Mexico. So for Mexico, the next question is, well, do you have someone that understands that market? Because what works here in the United States may or may not work in Mexico. To understand the culture within Mexico. For example, I'm in a few weeks getting ready to travel to the southern Mexican region. Well, what you see in southern Mexico may be different from central Mexico, which may be different from northern Mexico. So to really have someone that understands that, language may be an issue. And a lot of times in the capital cities, depending on where you go, it may or may not be an issue. You do have English speakers, but let's say if language is an issue, do you have people on your team that fluently, not just a line here or there, but really fluently understand that language, or where you bring people on that speak that language fluently and within the proper context? It's not just about understanding the language. I am a Spanish speaker. And sometimes when I see things that someone or Google Translate that people use, and I have to say, no, that's not going to work because it's not the right word for the context. So those are some things to take into account. And then to really do an honest assessment of your strengths and weaknesses. What are the strengths of the company itself, as well as your product or service? And then what are some of the weaknesses or limitations, some areas for improvement? It could be, well, we may need to get people with the right skills. Well, if identify that, and then you know what needs to be worked on so that you can have a successful export process. Okay, so that's number one, our firm assessment. The next step is market research. This is another area a lot of times that gets overlooked, and market research or customized market research means different things to different people. When I talk about market research, and I will stress the customized market research, we're not talking about a general report that can apply to anyone. I'll give you an example. In the past, when I've worked with companies and I say, hey, here's some resources that you can tap into, the main thing they come back to me with is, well, I get it, but everything is so general, I'm still not quite sure how to start. Okay, so there's general information just to get started, but you really need the information that speaks to your company. As I put it, coming from a journalism background and telling stories to bring people in, the way that I explain market research or describe customized market research is, from that data, it needs to tell a story that makes sense for your company, based on, going back to number one, after you've done your assessment, based on your resources, your capabilities, and your capacity. So this research needs to align with that, not something that says, hey, China and Brazil, using my earlier example, China and Brazil are great markets, but that might not be a great market for your company. And with the resources that you have, it might be a good market for a multinational corporation. And even multinational corporations face challenges. And if they face challenges that you don't have the resources to overcome, then those two markets might not make sense for you. So that's what I mean when we talk about customized market research. This is not just an activity just to have data for the sake of having data, but to have that data make sense for your company so that you could move forward successfully. So that first step are the trade trends. to look at. And I'm just going to quickly, because this, again, this is an overview. I could do a whole session, which I normally do, on market research. That's really my area. When companies come to me is for that in-depth market research, but I'm just going to show a quick resource and go through it very quickly, just so that you can do well, you'll have the recording or a screenshot or something, so that you just know a resource to get started. Okay, so I'm just going to, all right, if I could just quickly share my screen. All right.
You should have
Okay,
access.
so yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but this is a good resource. This is to get you started. Now, when I look at data, everyone can see this, right? The trade stats express, that's what's showing up, correct?
Go ahead and share
is
your
that
screen
show-
again.
Oh, okay, let me try. Right. Okay. And share. Okay, there. You see it now, right? This should show. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to I'm just showing this to you. I don't want anyone overwhelmed. This is a good start. However, I will stress this is a good start when we're talking about national level data or state level data, just to understand trade trends. However, when getting back to that customized market research, there are other resources that are far more specific when it comes to looking at what your competitors, identifying potential buyers and looking at what they're doing and looking at trends when it comes down to your product level. Nevertheless, just to give you a sense, this is a site, trade.gov. This comes from the US Department of Commerce and particularly the International Trade Administration. A lot of times I will start with this just to say, okay, what's going on with a particular market regarding someone's product? Okay, so we'll just use product. I won't do the country. Okay, and this just gives us a sense. Now, while I'm talking about product, while this loads, the key thing to take into account, and if you're taking notes, when we look at product, it's very important to properly classify your product. Okay, what I mean by that is knowing how your product is classified by what is called an HS code, harmonized system code. Okay, HS code, harmonized system code. And the way that you get that information is, I definitely recommend working with a customs broker. I know that there are tools where you could search the code, etc. But if you're not used to reading what's called an HS code, definitely confirm with a customs broker how your product is classified. These are codes that are set up to a certain digit all around the world. And if you have the wrong code or you misclassify and you export to another country, and let's say with that country, the purpose of these codes for classification is to determine, do you pay taxes on your goods entering that market, what are called tariffs, and we'll talk about that later, tariffs and duties. If you misclassify, and let's say you don't pay tariffs or duties because you've misclassified and you have a product that it may say 0 tariffs, then there could be a whole host of fines later on, and we don't want that. Okay, so that's the importance of classifying. So just quickly to show, but a customs broker will help with this. So let me go to my favorite one, only because I deal with this a lot and know it inside out. Oh, okay, maybe, hold on, let me, oops. I'm going to get to my codes here. Okay, so I will just take plastics. Okay, so in there, you know, it gives us up to a certain number of digits. Now with these codes, they're 10 digits. This only gives us the first 2 or 4 digits. Okay, here we go. Let me go back here. Let me restart. And if my network is a tad bit slow, then I'm sure a customs broker will go through this in more detail. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, the HS code. Okay, so HS4. And this just so you could see what this looks like. And then we're going to go back to the presentation. Okay, and while this loads, the other thing with this, again, the site from the Department of Commerce, you'll notice it only has data up to 2023, and we are wrapping up 2024. When I work with clients, again, this is a good start, but let's just think about the pandemic, right? The pandemic hit by March, where it really took its toll by March of 2020, where we saw that things were shutting down, et cetera. And the trade figures changed dramatically in 2020. But if I were to use 2019 data to say, hey, this is what we're seeing with this market, that data could be outdated and send you in the wrong direction when you're operating in the conditions in 2020. And I'm not only using that, that's the most recent example, but I see that a lot where you can have so many changes just within a matter of months. So when I am working with clients, I use other sources to get data looking at what is happening in the current year, or at least the most recent quarter. Okay, so HS4, and I'm just going to use one of the codes here. I'm just going to use, let's say, t-shirts, because I do a lot when it comes to apparel. So 6109 t-shirts, and this will just give you a sense. This is set to export right here, and this just gives you a sense of what it looks like when we're talking about our international trade trends. Okay, and so when this comes up, once it loads, then you will see what this looks like when identifying a market. That's the whole point of this, is when we're looking at the trade trends, we're trying to see what are some markets that we can consider through our research, identifying the right market for our good. Well, this one is mainly good, only goods. So services is another issue. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is what it looks like as you see here. So it's 6109, that's the code. It's a 4-digit code to let us know we're talking about t-shirts. It's set at the trade flow of exports. And then if I'm trying to export t-shirts, just regular t-shirts, nothing too fancy, then this gives me a sense of, all right, this is how much from the US. This is all US data. So US imports and exports, what we see to the world, but then also identifying the top markets and the trends over time. That's very important as well. So the top markets, no surprise there, Mexico and Canada. When I say no surprise there, that is because we have a trade agreement signed with Canada and Mexico, not just because they're geographically closer, but we also have a trade agreement designed to promote exports and imports between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Then Nicaragua, we also have an agreement, Honduras, Japan, so on and so forth. So this is a useful tool for, first of all, identifying the right market, then looking at over a period of time. So let's say Mexico, looking at these numbers year by year, and then over that period from 2017 to 2023 to see, do we see any growth or is there a decline, and use that to determine whether or not this is a feasible market for your product or a market worth considering. So this just gives you an insight, a tool for getting started with the research, looking at trade trends. Again, with the goal of identifying a sustainable market for your product. And this is a part of that systematic approach, as opposed to, hey, I got one order in Mexico, and you might see, well, Mexico as overall may or may not be a great market, but Canada is. So that's the point of this. Okay, so we'll go back to our slide show here. So, all right, so that was the trade trends. Competitors and buyers, very important. This is always the next step when companies come to me, and rightfully so. And I incorporate that, knowing who your competitors and buyers are. Now, oh, yeah, if so, there are different ways of doing that. A lot of times it is primary research, primary data collection. And what that means is either you're traveling to these markets to see who's doing what, or you're talking to people, and all of that is very helpful. But with information, data collection, and technology now, you can save yourself all that travel time. Market research does not mean anymore like what I used to do up to a few years ago. You get on a plane, you go somewhere, you start talking to people. There's a lot that you can do before you even start going to a particular market. I'm thinking about a company, and when I say this, it's to minimize the companies on this call having to do this, spending a lot of time. I'm thinking about one company in particular where the person had traveled to another market and done research, wasn't really sure if it was the right market, and invested all this time and money. And a year later, I said, well, how are you doing anything? No, we're still trying to figure it out. Well, as small business owners, and this was a small business owner, even if I were a large company, you do not want to have to spend so much of your money just trying to figure it out. There's so many resources now, and this is what a lot of times when I'm working with companies that I'm able to do is pull a comprehensive list of your competitors. Which companies are exporting the same product using those HS codes that I talked about earlier? Which companies are exporting that product to which markets, and how often are they doing so? If we could, yeah, there we go. Then also the buyers, that's what you want to know. And having a comprehensive list allows you to be more selective, as opposed to, okay, I talked to this one person for months on end, they still don't buy anything, to actually have that information of who's actually buying that product. How often are they buying it? From whom are they buying that product, so that you can develop a more targeted approach. And it's not to say that you're restricted to that list, but it just makes it that much easier, as opposed to getting one over here or one over there. Have a comprehensive list to at least get you started. And then when you go to these markets, you may find, or talk to other people, you may get additional information. And then lastly, when it gets to the market environment, as a part of that research, to really understand the market. For example, I lived in the Dominican Republic. A lot of times when people travel to the Dominican Republic, they talk about Punta Cana for vacation, but that is not the Dominican Republic. I lived in Santo Domingo, did some work in Santiago, different parts of the country. And it's very important to understand what that environment really is like. Going to beach resorts will give you a skewed view that does not represent what it's like working, operating, and doing business in these particular markets. So it's very important to understand the market environment, what is happening politically, economically, who your consumers are, the demographics, culturally, how do they approach business, technology, any of these different issues, and if environment, different things that may have an impact on your ability to compete in that market, or just how business is done. For example, Mexico, I do a lot of work with Mexico. And I remember there was someone that was telling me how her company had lost a big deal because they did not understand how business operated in Mexico. A lot of times when I travel, I spend quite a bit of time there because I do not expect to give a business card, shake hands, and we're ready to do a deal. It's completely different. And these are the types of nuances that are very important to understand. how people operate. When it comes to Mexico, it's like really being able to go out, have dinner. People have to get to know you, the face to face, as opposed to here's my card, let's do business, right? Or when I was in Cuba, I saw a gentleman that did not take advantage of opportunities in Cuba. He thought, I'll come back to the United States, I'll email, get what I needed, versus understanding the limitations of technology in Cuba and doing what needed to be done there. So these are the types of things that's very important to understand in the market environment. Step number 3, the next slide. Okay, do not be alarmed. These are just some things that I've already talked about. What to include or consider in your market research. So I've already talked about culture, the environment, so I can skip over those. I mentioned demographics, unless someone has any questions. The political situation, is it stable politically, or if there's anything going on in a country that's where it's politically unstable, that's going to have an impact. I've had some clients where that has happened, where they did well in a market, but then politically things changed and they had to shut down their business or pull out of that particular market. But the key thing really to start are the tariff and non-tariff barriers that I definitely want people to think about, and also the variation in exchange rate. That makes sense, because then that determines if you make money or not with the differences in the exchange rate. Will it make you more competitive, meaning that your product will be financially accessible to the consumers, or does the difference in the exchange rate make your product more expensive to the point that people cannot afford your product? But with the tariff, the main one I'm going to focus on is the tariff and non-tariff barriers. Very important. Tariff barriers, this becomes very important, and to definitely follow anytime when it comes to policies. And one thing I did not mention at the beginning, I come from a political science background. So when I look at international trade, I'm always looking at it more so, not just the business transactions, but the policy perspectives. What policies are being put in place? And just yesterday, I was on a call, and that was when I gave a talk. That was the main thing. By the end of that meeting, people wanted to hear, well, what's your perspective about what's happening with regard to tariffs and the impact that it's going to have on businesses and consumers and the economy overall. So it's these tariffs. And what tariffs are, these are taxes that are placed on a good entering another market. So for example, using t-shirts, if I'm going to export my t-shirt to Mexico, well, there shouldn't be a tariff placed on those t-shirts because we have a trade agreement. These trade agreements are designed to reduce or eliminate tariffs. But if I go to another market, let's say Brazil, where we do not have a trade agreement, then there may be a chance that it is not at 0%. That you have to understand what is the tariff rates, because it's those tariff rates that have an impact on your ability to compete in that market. If you have extremely high tariff rates, well, guess what? Someone in that market will say, well, we can get it from China. Why am I going to pay for these t-shirts from the United States, the same type of t-shirt from the United States, if I've got to pay these additional tariffs? I would rather get it from another market. And it doesn't even have to be China. It could be another market where Brazil has a trade agreement and the tariffs are at 0. So it affects your ability to compete. And then it also, if you have to import any goods for your product, it affects your cost as well. This goes into your cost. Non-tariff barriers need to be discussed a whole lot more than just your tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers are regulations that are put in place that make it difficult to enter that market. For example, if you're exporting food products, there may be some standards that may exist, some rightfully so, that may say, well, this food product may not be safe for human consumption because of certain ingredients or things that are put into that product. We see this a lot when it comes to meat and hormones and different things that alter that food product. But it can also be used to limit competition as well. And so that's kind of That's all determined by, trade negotiations or trade disputes and things like that. But when it comes to the non-tariff barriers, these are regulations for service providers, non-tangible goods. Intellectual property is an example, looking at these different regulations that may have an impact on your ability to enter that market. Then the next slide, number 3, goes into our regulatory compliance. So that's a good segue when we talk about non-tariff barriers, regulatory compliance. And so if you're in the food and beverage space, this is very, very important for you to understand what are the regulations going into that particular market as it pertains to your food or beverage product. Are there any agencies? For example, here in the United States, we have our Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. Are there agencies that you need to be aware of, documentations, paperworks that you need to be aware of when exporting your product to that market? Any regulations or guidelines that you need to follow so that you do not get into any kind of trouble. Then if our PowerPoint slide can go back up. Okay, then the next slide on the regulatory compliance. I think I had cosmetics and plants. A lot of times I work with cosmetics producers, some where they're importing into the United States, but also exporting, again, to understand what are the regulations when it comes, if any, when it comes to cosmetics. What do you need to know about labeling, which we'll get to later on, but any labeling of your products, any kind of regulations when it comes to ingredients in those products, understand that in the market. If anyone, plant producers, I deal a lot with agriculture and have done quite a bit of work when it comes to going out to meet with producers out in Palm Desert, Palm Springs, Indio, doing agricultural summits. So I've encountered people where they're trying to export plants, certain types of plants, again, to make sure you understand how your product is classified and what regulations are for that product. And the same, I threw in services very heavily regulated when it comes to certain types of services. So it's very important to know what those regulations are. And then as a part of the research, what does this mean for your ability to compete in that particular market? Because sometimes identifying the market may also mean scratching out a particular market, even if this market is number 1 on the list, doing the research that I just showed you. But if you find that there are some regulations or stiff competition that make it difficult for you to enter that market, then you would have to really make the decision to say, well, maybe this isn't the right market. Here's another market to consider. Step 4 is your export plan and strategy. So you're taking all of this is moving forward. But before I get into the export plan and strategy, I want to just kind of stop quickly to see if anyone has any questions or comments related to the information that has been provided thus far on your firm assessment, doing the market research, and regulatory compliance. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Or is everything clear so far? See, I don't see anything in the chat. Okay, so I assume that everything is good. Okay, all right, so we'll go to the next slide with the export plan and strategy. So basically, all that is you're taking everything that we've done up until this point, the process, doing an honest assessment of your firm, your resources, your capabilities, your capacity, doing that honest assessment, then aligning that, doing or what we all know, SWOT analysis, right? The strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what are the strengths and weaknesses or limitations of your company? And when we talk about the weaknesses or limitations, that's just to really highlight the areas where you may need to bring in additional resources or what have you, so that you can export successfully and compete in other markets to grow your business, and then to have a sustainable business because you have gone global. So to really understand, taking that assessment and the research, putting them together, going back to what I said earlier, telling a story that makes sense for your company and your particular product and service. Taking that and using that information to devise a strategy that makes sense, a market entry strategy. When we're talking about strategy, what one strategy for one company may not necessarily work for your company. That's important to understand. That's why it's more of the customized market research versus just a general report on what you need to know about a market, to really develop a sound strategy and a flexible strategy, because there may be some things that you may not, that even you could do all of the planning in the world and still do not predict or foresee. So to have a strategy that makes sense, but also to look at some forecasts to say, well, this may happen in a year, we may need to adjust or something like that. So that's all that is, to make sure you have a sound plan and strategy. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now that you have your strategy, now it comes down to looking at your particular product. Once you've identified a market, whether it's, for example, Germany, because I think about when I would travel to Europe a lot, and some countries throughout Latin America as well, where, you know, we all use plugs and cords and all of this stuff, you know, even though you do have wireless options, but nonetheless, you still have to plug things up, charge them. And it comes down to just as simple as making sure you have the right adapter to plug in your product, your computer, let's say, in another, when you're in another country. The same approach with your particular product, to understand what is needed, the size, how it is used in another market. What are the features that may differ from what people, the way it is used here in the United States? The packaging and the labeling. Packaging, labeling, how it looks to attract buyers. But this also goes to the previous point about the compliance, because you do have requirements when it comes to how a product is packaged and particularly what goes on a label. These are some things that you work with your customs broker, your freight forwarder, the right people on your packaging and labeling. Okay, and this is not with regard to marketing, just regulatory compliance. The features, that's where really understanding, this is where additional research comes in, understanding the right features so that it adapts to that market. And of course, language and culture, going back to the way things are phrased, the way certain words, for example, you may, even the name of the product might, and I, you know, there are several examples when it comes to Spanish, where there is a word in English that is used in marketing material, not realizing that it's a Spanish word that has a completely different meaning. So if you're in that market and you're looking at that word, it may relay another message and you're not sure, like, well, why did they say that? And so then it creates a lot of confusion. So really understanding, again, language, the context, so that you can minimize any confusion when you're doing business in a particular market. Okay, so now that we have adapted our product, now the next step we're going to go into with our sixth step is financing and pricing. Very, very important to understand. Landed costs, very important. And I just cannot tell you how many times we talk about landed costs. And I've seen some small business owners where whatever opportunity comes up, they're going to spend the money, and not real, before even sitting down and saying, these are the costs across the whole chain, the export process. To really sit down when you're doing your research, or hire someone to help you with that research, to look at the landed costs, meaning, are there tariffs? So tariffs is mentioned, tariffs and non-tariff measures that I talked about earlier. Are there any tariffs on my good? Or when I'm bringing in a good, from another country. For example, you could be making whatever product and you're using parts from different parts of the world. Well, that adds to your cost if you're importing those inputs to make a final product that you're going to export out. What are the costs, and not just the cost of purchasing that product, but any additional tariffs or taxes that are placed on that product, to understand that. Documentation. So I'm sure you're going to have someone that talks about the types of documents that you need to be aware of when you are exporting a product. But even those documents have their costs when you're exporting a product. Working with the freight forwarder, any shipping costs, all of these things you need to take into account. And now notice I'm just really talking about the export process. I'm not really getting into what you need to know once you get into that market. Once your product gets through customs, then you have these additional costs, any kind of marketing, etc. Those are additional costs, but I'm just really focused on the export process itself. Tariffs, as I mentioned, those are taxes that are placed on goods that enter any market that's different from where a product was produced originally. So these are things that you need to take into account when you're determining your costs, and to say, okay, well, with these costs, what impact does that have on my pricing in that market? Non-tariff measures, regulations can add to your cost. Any kind of testing that you may need to do for your product or show that your product is safe, those are all things to take into account. Export financing, and you're going to hear more about this as this program continues. But export financing is definitely a huge issue, because capital, a lot of times small businesses do not necessarily have the capital. So the good thing about being here in the state of California, that we are one of the recipients of the STEP grant. You're going to hear the STEP, STEP grant, which is designed to provide grants, some funding, but it really is a reimbursement, to provide reimbursement, and you'll get all of the details about this grant, but provide you reimbursement for export related activities, such as maybe attending a trade show, translating your website, things of that nature, doing some market research. So it's very important. And I don't know if anyone's on the call, if they want to just put the link to the STEP grant, and there is all of the information from the GO-Biz office where you can read more about it, but you will hear more about it. But at least for today, you actually have the link to the STEP grant. Yeah, so that's the main one that I'll focus on, but there are different financing options, and working with someone in that space that understands what are some of the opportunities to get some financing to offset some of the costs associated with exporting. Okay, I think I see. All right. Oh, cool. Okay, let's see. I see a few questions. Erin, you're so welcome. Yes, you're very welcome. I just to read about, shout out to the Department of Commerce, absolutely, and the resources, and then recommending the use a good, yes, and I like you said that, and I always say license. That's one of the things I say, because you don't know who you're dealing with now. A licensed customs broker, so that's the key. Would the strategy? There's a question. Would the strategy need to be based on the different services, products, or just one for the whole business? Good question. That's a really, really good question from Bernice Jackson. So if your business has, I want to actually, I don't know if Bernice, if you would mind telling me a little bit about your business. Do you have a business where you have both services and products? Is Bernice? Or I can try to answer it as best I can. So sometimes it can be either way. It can be for the whole business, but sometimes, for example, I am working with a company now where the strategy might vary slightly, not too much, but very slightly, because this is a company that does both products and services. So for example, the product, And there was another company where he did the same thing, where that particular product that had that falls in the whole environmental sustainability space, we had to work with him on how do you sell this product in this particular market. Going to the client where we did finish the project, one I'm working with him now, but with this company, it was a market in Latin America, and we had to work with him on, it was a great product, don't get me wrong, it was a great product, but he just was not able to close the deals. So we had to develop a strategy. Going back to some of what I was saying is, what's the best way to frame it so that people in this market would be interested in your product, as opposed to this is what it does. What does it mean for that culture that's more family oriented or whatever, to really frame the product? Then the services for this particular company was not necessarily working directly with the consumer. It was providing services where it was training. So then the strategy differed a tad bit, meaning that, okay, now we're working with different organizations in this market to provide the training to also help promote this product and what it means for the environment and people in that particular country. So then the question would be, and that we were able to solve on, all right, now how do you market to these organizations? You're not going directly to the consumer. Now you're dealing with governmental organizations or non-governmental organizations, both governmental and non-governmental organizations in that market. So then how do you adjust your strategy so that you could provide the service in that particular market? Okay, so I hope that answered that question. And then let's see, with the additional cost, should you increase? Yeah. Well, yeah, with the additional cost, should you increase the price of the product? Excellent question. Wow, these are great questions coming in. You have no choice but to increase the price of the product. This is where understanding the market becomes very important, because if you increase the price of the product and you're reaching consumers that cannot afford the product, you're not going to do well. If you have to increase the price of the product in a market, but you can find consumers that are willing to pay that price, and you don't have competition undercutting that, then yeah, you would increase the price of the product. But if you find that you have to increase the price of this product and you're not really selling as much as you would like, you're selling at a loss in that market, then that's a decision that you and your team would have to make about, is this really a viable market? Okay. Oh, and I saw currently just serve. Oh, I'm not sure what that was about. Was that in reference to my question about the products or services? It's currently just services. So what's the strategy? Yeah, so if you're just selling, if these are all services that are interrelated, then you shouldn't have too many, we don't want to complicate things. You should just have a single strategy that will make sense for these interrelated services for your business. And I'll give you an example. My business, right? My business, it's a service, right? But when I have a strategy, it's not based on the types of service. Is my strategy will shift because of the market. I've had to do this quite a lot within the last 2 years because I offer different services: consulting services, educational training services, online courses, different things. I've been able to expand my services. However, I've had to kind of shift depending on the market, going back to that question about price, because I can be in a market. I'm thinking about a West African market. Many people are interested, but because of what's happening economically, even my prices, which may not seem like a lot here, are extremely high in that market. So I've had to kind of adjust so that I could keep that fan base. I don't believe it. I look at people that support me like as a fan base, to keep them engaged, not just a business transaction and that's it, but to keep them engaged all across my funnels, right? To keep people involved. And when I've had to adjust, it's really depending on the market, where I may kind of say, well, these services I can offer where it's feasible to this market, adjust the prices or something like that, as long as it does not, it doesn't result in my business operating at a loss for too long. So it's really, for me, the market that I go to where I have to adjust my strategy, as opposed to adjusting the strategy for each service. So I hope that makes sense. And then let's see. Oh, fabulous. Great. Thank you. And would you know what would be a good strategy for a contingent staffing firm? Oh, I love this one. That is global and conducts payrolling services along with talent services. All right. Well, this is one that requires really a one-on-one, and Elizabeth can set this up on some additional services outside of this training, because I would need to have more information. The reason why I said this is a good one, because I have worked with staffing firms, mainly dealing with the sub-Saharan African region. I've dealt with that industry, but I would need to know more about the company and the markets that you're considering, or identifying the right markets, and that would be, then from there, I would be able to say this is a strategy worth considering. So thank you for that question. D, I see. Thank you for that question. All right. These are great questions. Okay, great. So keep them coming, keep them coming. All right, because we're almost through the steps, but these were great questions. I'm so glad that you're asking, because this is the time to ask these kinds of questions before you get started. All right, so we'll now move on to step number 7. Okay, logistics and distribution. Okay, so this, I'm not going to go into too many details, but this is where you really need that specialized support on helping you with the actual movement of your good. Now, for service providers, that's a whole different, that's a different process. But for people that are shipping tangible goods, it's very, very important to work with. So I have shipping, but that's working with a freight forwarder, a licensed freight forwarder. Now, let me go through these, and I'm going to say, because the next question that often comes up is, well, how do I find a freight forwarder or a customs broker? But let me just stay on point with, get a freight forwarder that will help you with the shipping, with your documentation. Now, I can't stress enough, because I've heard this from a lot of my colleagues who are in licensed customs brokers and freight forwarders. Whatever documentation goes out, you are responsible for that information on that documentation. So do not just hand it over and then just let the people that you hire, your customs broker, freight forwarders, figure it out. You have to have the information accurate, because if something goes wrong, that still comes back to you and your company. So you're going to work with a freight forwarder for the actual shipping, to do your homework about different freight forwarding companies, their capabilities, their shipping routes, if they go to certain regions. Because a lot of times when I work with clients, especially since I deal a lot with Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in addition to Latin America. But when it comes to Africa, a lot of times I refer my clients to several different companies, and then they can do their due diligence and make the final selection. But finding companies where they normally ship between sub-Saharan Africa, or Africa, the African continent in general, but I always say sub-Saharan Africa, because that's the region that I work with the most, to that actually know how to keep costs low when doing business or shipping your goods between the United States and, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa. So it's very important to get a list of freight forwarding companies, talk to your peers, anyone else that you know that's exporting, and ask questions of the freight forwarding company in terms of their costs, how they can keep costs reasonable for you. If anything were to go wrong, insurance, very important in case anything goes wrong while your freight is being shipped, because it's not if, it's when things do happen. And all of these types of things, any use of technology so that you could track your good, supply chain management. These are types of questions that you should keep in the back of mind, and when reaching out to, talking to freight forwarders. licensed customs broker as well. And the licensed customs broker will help you with understanding any customs related matter when entering a market, the tariffs that I've talked about, any non-tariff measures or regulations you need to be aware of, anything pertaining to your product that you need to be aware of, additional taxes, what have you, to get into that market. So get a licensed customs broker. Now, for both, since we're here in California, I always, one of the things that I've done to refer people is either I will refer them to people that I know, that I've worked with, that I trust, that are both licensed customs brokers and freight forwarders. But if not, because people move on and they move on in their careers and do other things, that I do refer, because I don't want to get I always get the order of the name wrong. So just let me do a quick search here, and then I will put it in the chat. It's, what is this? National Association Licensed, or National Associations of Freight Forwarders, I think. Freight Forwarders and brokers. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so this is an organization, and they have a local chapter here in Los Angeles, but I always kind of start here. National Customs Broker Freight Forwarders Association. Okay, I'll just put this here. Oops, did it? Okay. And okay, that's I'm going to send it. This is a good resource, when you're trying to utilize some of these associations to identify qualified people. And I'm just going to put in, there is a Los Angeles one. So that's the national level. And here we go. Los Angeles Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association. This is a resource for helping you, do at least a good starting point for identifying people who are qualified in this space. And then also they can work with you on the warehousing, the different types of companies that can also help you with the warehousing. One other, without me going all into detail about that due to the interest of time, if you are bringing in goods, we have what's called free trade zones. You have your FTZs, or free trade zones here or foreign trade zones, I'm sorry, foreign trade zones here in the United States. Overseas, they call them free trade zones, export processing zones, and maquilas, depending on where you are. But the whole point of the foreign trade zone is, let's say if you are, I mentioned earlier, if you are bringing in goods for inputs for a final product from another market, well, you can bring that in duty free if you stay, your warehousing is within that foreign trade zone, or FTZ, and we have them all throughout Southern California. If you and you manufacture that product using those inputs, as long as you export out, then you can enjoy your duty-free treatment. Okay, so that's something to think about also when you're talking about your warehousing, your location of the warehousing, where your good is manufactured and produced. Okay. And one other thing that I need to mention, where your good is manufactured and produced, this is very important, going back to the tariffs and the policy, is you have to show if you're trying to take advantage of some of the programs, like I mentioned, our trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, you have to complete one of the documents, a certificate of origin, to show that your product was manufactured here in one of the 3 countries, and of course, this varies by product, what percentage of that product was manufactured, to make sure it fulfills those requirements, so that you can benefit from some of these trade programs and trade agreements as well. So that's just something else to think about when it comes to the production of your product, where it is produced, etc. Okay, and I think I have one more slide on this. Yeah, that's it. So 7 points. Okay. So so that's me. You can reach out to me or communicate through Elizabeth, but there's also my information to learn more about what I do. And I also, you can send me an email. I can put you on the mailing list because I keep these tips, just basic tips that I put out as well in the newsletter, especially as we're preparing for 2025 on things to think of as you start exporting. Or also with 2025, we have some interesting changes when it comes to some of the opportunities for importers and exporters. And that is also used to keep followers abreast of what is happening or what is going on or what's forthcoming, so that you can have that flexible plan and strategy that I talked about earlier and adjust and respond versus react. Okay. All right.
Yes, and
Okay.
again, my name is Johnny Buck. I'm a program manager, and just want to thank Sarita again for kicking off our 6-part series on a comprehensive overview of exporting. Some of the resources that she provided include the California STEP program. If you did not have a chance to actually see that, we do have a link in the chat right now. The California STEP program is the California State Trade and Expansion Program, a really good resource. Again, thank you, Sarita, for that. This is our first workshop of the series. This series is based on it's a comprehensive overview of exporting. Next week, we'll be having another workshop, which is based around export control and compliance. That is going to be really big if you want to get into exporting. I see Sarika agreeing with me. I know she knows the importance behind that.
Especially if it's technology. Yeah, totally.
That exactly. It's everything. And that again, that's going to be a Zoom. Once again, to register for that, you guys can register right now. There is going to be it's the same link that you registered for this event. Um, when you register, you'll also have a chance. That link will provide you an opportunity to connect with a business advisor that will actually be able to help you out as you're managing through this exporting journey that we're taking you guys through. We'll also be providing market intelligence report that comes along with this program. So again, all great resources. Thank you again, Sarita. Right now, we're going to actually invite everybody into the chat so that you can actually ask questions one-on-one with Sarita. Give me just 1 second. Okay. But again, just want to thank everybody for coming out. We're also going to be sending a survey to get everybody's feedback on this event. All right, it looks like we have one person joining in. We have other people joining in. Again, this is your opportunity to ask you questions one-on-one with Sarita.
Or if not, I wonder, I'd like to ask a question of the people on the call. I'm just curious as to where people are. I know we're at the beginning stages, but where you are in your export journey, and then how do you think you're going to use some of the information that you got today? What's the next step for you and your company?
Yes, hi. This is DeForest Kirkwood D, who asked the question about the staffing. So I guess the next steps would possibly be to set up a one-on-one with you. I know we're trying to get into parts of Africa. We see a lot of talent coming out of Nigeria, which we can use as leverage because usually, like let's say, you want let's say you want a front end developer from the States, it'll cost possibly $250,000 annually, where you could go to Nigeria and get someone for 95,000 who can do the same work. And some of our clients are using that as leverage. The problem with staffing, just like any other business, has to do with the presidential administration. So seeing that we have a new administration now, we have to follow the whole guidelines of like sponsorship and things like that. But if like someone is working overseas and then we're giving that business here, it usually has to be like a contingent work. It can't be like a full-time work. So that's basically what we are trying to do. We don't have goods and services, we have talent. And then I can't say that we're shipping people, because then that will be human trafficking. And then some actual agencies are in deep hot water for that. They're actually known for doing human trafficking. So you have to be careful when it comes to staffing, when you're actually doing this type of work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely, because I talk about products, but also I talk a lot about services, which,
Mhm.
and I know you mentioned with the talent, but still it's a service.
Professional,
Nonetheless, when
yeah.
you're talking professional services. So yeah, because I have a whole book about that, because that's one of the things coming from an academic background. When I would teach in business schools, even though my background is in political science, but once I started my company, I would teach in business schools, and I would talk about services, because I know trade from a practical perspective from exporting services. And I
Mhm.
would talk about it, and then I realized there aren't any resources. I mean, there are things out there, but they're extremely technical, not for just the practical of how to. So I would love to talk to you, because I know the services, the resources specifically for services when it comes to Africa as well. And then just was last week, I had a whole talk about, with what's happening with the change in the administration, what that can mean for US Africa trade.
Mhm.
And that's actually one of the things that we're looking at for 2025. But again, that's more on products with our African Growth and Opportunities Act, but there's still some opportunities. So from the services Africa side, going through this program, I would love to help out, and especially services, because like I said, it gets overlooked so much. And there are service providers that are wondering, okay, well, what do I do? Because I don't have tariffs. I'm not shipping anything tangible. But,
Yeah.
and then also how to access capital for when it comes to service providers as well. So I'd love to continue the conversation.
Yes, I've sent you an invite on LinkedIn, so hopefully we can connect and take it from there. I believe this could be the start of a beautiful business relationship. So thank you, Sarita. Appreciate you, Dr. Sarita.
Any other questions? And Bernice, I saw you had some great questions, and it looks like I answered that. And so if you have anything else, and Aaron, thank you for your comments as well. But this has been really great.
Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. And
Okay. Well, if that is all, again, we appreciate everybody for logging on today. And if you do have any additional questions, as Sarita mentioned, you can definitely reach out to her. You can also reach out to Elizabeth at Black Tech Link. And we hope to see you guys at the next workshop.
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.